Ferrari thought they had a brake problem. The FIA may have just revealed something far worse, because hidden inside the data from Canada was a number that sent shockwaves through the paddock. Ferrari could be down more than 20 horsepower compared to Mercedes, and suddenly Lewis Hamilton's incredible performance looks almost impossible. While Hamilton was fighting Max Verstappen corner after corner, Charles Leclerc was trapped inside what he later called one of the worst weekends of his entire career. Same team, same car, completely different reality. But here is where the story becomes explosive. The FIA's engine recalibration system may now give Ferrari emergency development freedom mid-season. Something teams almost never want to need. That is how serious the situation has become. Because Ferrari is now facing a terrifying possibility. What if the SF26 is finally becoming comfortable for Hamilton? Right when Ferrari discovers the engine itself is not powerful enough to fight for a championship. And the deeper you look into the Canada data, the worse it gets. The straight-line losses, the failed overtakes, the instability under pressure. Even Leclerc's collapse suddenly starts making sense. Now Ferrari has to answer the biggest question of their season. Can they save the engine project before Hamilton and Leclerc lose the championship completely? Subscribe if you love Formula One stories that reveal the hidden crisis behind the headlines. At first, almost nobody inside Formula One wanted to believe the number was real. More than 20 horsepower behind Mercedes. That is not a normal gap in modern Formula One. That is the kind of deficit that changes an entire season. And Ferrari knew immediately that Canada had exposed them. Because Montreal is one of the worst possible circuits to hide engine weakness. Long straights, heavy braking zones, constant acceleration. If your power unit is missing performance there, everybody sees it. Fans see it. Drivers feel it. Rival teams measure it. And suddenly, Ferrari's entire weekend started looking completely different once the real engine data emerged. Lewis Hamilton's fight for second place no longer looked like Ferrari underperforming. It looked like Hamilton overachieving. That is a huge difference, because while television cameras focused on the battle with Verstappen, Ferrari engineers were staring at sector data that revealed a much deeper problem. The SF26 was losing critical speed on the straights. Now imagine running a race while carrying a backpack heavier than everybody else's. You can still compete. You can still fight. But every straight section becomes harder work. That is basically what Hamilton and Leclerc were dealing with in Canada. And this is where Charles Leclerc's nightmare suddenly makes much more sense. Because when a car lacks straight-line power, drivers are forced to recover lap time somewhere else. Usually under braking. Usually through corners. Usually by attacking harder. But that creates another dangerous cycle. More aggressive corner entry overheats tires. Overheated tires destroy balance. Destroyed balance kills confidence. And confidence is everything in Formula One. Especially at a circuit like Montreal. Leclerc never escaped that spiral. Hamilton adapted to it. That was the difference. And Ferrari's internal frustration became even worse because the team arrived in Canada without major upgrades. Mercedes improved. McLaren improved. Red Bull evolved again. Ferrari stayed almost identical to Miami. That sounds small, but in Formula One, development speed is survival. Every race is like an arms race happening at 300 kilometers per hour. If one team stops improving for even 2 weekends, the gap suddenly looks enormous. That is exactly what happened to Ferrari. And then the championship standings made the situation impossible to ignore. Mercedes exploded further ahead after Antonelli's victory and Hamilton's podium finish. Ferrari lost even more ground. Not because the drivers failed, because the car itself could no longer hide its weaknesses. And now, inside Maranello, there is growing belief that the FIA's recalibration system may become Ferrari's only realistic chance to recover performance during the season. That is massive. Because Formula One teams hate needing regulatory help. Elite teams want dominance through development, not emergency assistance. But Ferrari may have reached the point where they simply have no choice. Especially because the engine problem is not something a setup change can magically fix. Aerodynamics can sometimes hide weaknesses. Driver talent can sometimes compensate. Missing horsepower cannot. Eventually, physics wins. And this is where the emotional side of the story becomes fascinating. Because while Ferrari is discovering how serious the engine deficit really is, Lewis Hamilton is finally starting to look comfortable with the SF26. That timing changes everything. 4 months, the biggest fear inside Ferrari was adaptation. Would Hamilton ever truly connect with the car? Canada may have answered that question. Yes. But now a far scarier question is replacing it. What happens if Hamilton unlocks the car completely? and Ferrari still cannot give him enough power to fight for victories consistently. Because if that happens, Ferrari could face the most painful situation imaginable. A driver finally ready to win, inside a car that still cannot fully deliver it. The deeper Ferrari investigated the Canada data, the more uncomfortable the truth became. This was not just a bad weekend. This was a structural warning. Because once engineers compared the GPS traces against Mercedes and Red Bull, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Ferrari was bleeding time almost every time full power mattered most. Corner exits, mid-straight acceleration, top speed recovery, tiny losses everywhere. And in Formula 1, tiny losses become massive over an entire lap. Think about sprinting uphill while everybody else runs on flat ground. You might survive for a while through effort alone, but eventually the energy drain catches you. That was Ferrari in Canada. And suddenly Hamilton's race looked even more extraordinary. Because the 7-time world champion was essentially compensating for the engine deficit with race management and braking precision. That is why his fight against Verstappen shocked so many people inside the paddock. On paper, Ferrari should not have been strong enough to stay there naturally. Hamilton forced the car into that fight anyway. And this is where things become emotionally complicated inside Ferrari's garage. Because Charles Leclerc could feel the weakness too. But unlike Hamilton, he never found a stable way around it. Instead, every limitation seemed to amplify another problem. Lack of straight-line power forced harder braking. Harder braking increased tire instability. Tire instability destroyed confidence. And once Leclerc lost confidence, the entire weekend collapsed around him. After the race, his comments sounded brutally honest. Not frustrated at the team. Frustrated at the feeling. He admitted he never truly felt connected to the car at any point during the weekend. That matters more than lap times. Because elite drivers depend on instinct. The moment instinct disappears, everything becomes delayed by half a second mentally. And in Formula 1, half a second feels enormous. Meanwhile, Hamilton was experiencing the exact opposite emotional trajectory. Lap after lap, he looked more comfortable, more synchronized, more natural. By the final stages of the race, Ferrari engineers were already noticing something important. Lewis was no longer driving around the car's weaknesses. He was beginning to exploit the car's strengths. That is a massive turning point for any driver-team relationship. And suddenly, a possibility that sounded impossible a few months ago started becoming real inside Maranello. Hamilton could actually lead Ferrari's future project faster than expected. But here is the terrifying problem. Ferrari's engine deficit threatens to destroy that momentum before it fully develops. Because Formula 1 is ruthless. Confidence matters. Momentum matters. But horsepower still decides championships. And according to the information coming out after Canada, Ferrari may still be dramatically behind Mercedes in raw engine performance. That changes strategy completely. Now Ferrari cannot simply focus on setups and tire management anymore. They need power. Urgently. Which is why the FIA's development recalibration system suddenly became the most important story inside Maranello. Because if Ferrari officially qualifies for additional engine development flexibility, the team could finally attack the one weakness they cannot currently hide. And here is what makes this so dangerous for the rest of the grid. If Ferrari gains extra engine development freedom while Hamilton continues adapting this quickly, the entire balance of the championship could shift later in the season. Not immediately, but gradually, race by race. Because Canada revealed something many rivals did not want to see. The SF26 may not be dominant, but in the right hands, it is becoming controllable. And controllable cars become dangerous very quickly once performance upgrades arrive, especially with a driver like Hamilton. Still, Ferrari now faces an uncomfortable internal reality. One side of the garage is moving toward confidence. The other side is moving toward frustration. And Formula 1 teams always feel those emotional shifts long before fans do. Mechanics notice it. Engineers notice it. Strategists definitely notice it. Momentum inside a team is almost invisible from the outside, until suddenly it changes everything. That may already be happening at Ferrari. Because after Canada, this no longer looks like a temporary performance issue. It looks like the beginning of a major turning point. For Hamilton, for Leclerc, and maybe for Ferrari's entire future direction. Inside Ferrari, there is now a growing fear nobody wanted to admit publicly at the start of the season. The SF26 may actually be two completely different cars depending on who is driving it. And Canada exposed that reality in the most brutal way possible. Because while Lewis Hamilton was extracting podium pace from the Ferrari, Charles Leclerc was describing one of the lowest confidence weekends of his entire Formula One career. That kind of split does not happen accidentally. Not at this level. Not inside a top team. And this is where the engine deficit becomes far more dangerous than people realize. Because when a car lacks power, drivers naturally start searching for lap time somewhere else. Later braking. More aggressive corner entry. Earlier throttle application. Riskier rotation. Tiny extra pushes everywhere. But here is the hidden problem. Those aggressive adjustments only work if the car feels predictable underneath you. Hamilton slowly found that predictability. Leclerc never did. And Ferrari's engineers are now trying to understand whether that difference comes from driving style, or something much bigger inside the car's behavior itself. Because the more data Ferrari studies, the more complicated the picture becomes. Hamilton appears to stabilize the SF26 through smoother energy management. Leclerc naturally attacks sharper and more aggressively on entry. Normally, that difference is manageable. But when the car already suffers from instability caused by tire temperatures, braking balance, and reduced straight-line efficiency, those driving styles suddenly produce completely different results. Imagine two people trying to carry a damaged shopping cart downhill. One moves carefully and keeps the cart stable. The other pushes aggressively, trying to force speed. The unstable wheel affects both people differently. That is essentially what Ferrari discovered in Canada. And honestly, this may explain why Hamilton looked better and better as the race progressed. Long runs helped him understand where the car's limits actually were. Once he found that rhythm, the SF26 stopped fighting him constantly. That is why his final stint against Verstappen looked so controlled. Not desperate. Calculated. And this is the terrifying realization now spreading through the paddock. If Hamilton is already learning how to maximize Ferrari's weak points this quickly, what happens once the car actually gains power? Because the FIA recalibration process could potentially hand Ferrari additional engine development opportunities later this season. That possibility alone is making rival teams nervous. Not because Ferrari is dominant today. They clearly are not. But because Formula One momentum changes extremely fast once drivers and engineers align emotionally. And after Canada, Hamilton suddenly looks emotionally connected to Ferrari in a way nobody had fully seen before. The radio sounded calmer. The body language looked lighter. Even his post-race comments carried a completely different energy. 4 months, people questioned whether Hamilton would ever truly adapt to Ferrari's environment. Now the bigger question is becoming something else entirely. Can Ferrari fix the engine fast enough before the season slips away? Because while Hamilton's confidence is rising, the championship gap is growing at the same time. That contradiction is what makes this situation so dangerous. Ferrari may finally be solving the human side of the project, while still losing the technical war underneath it. And there is another layer here that almost nobody is discussing yet. The emotional pressure inside the garage. Leclerc has spent years as Ferrari's central figure, the future project, the long-term leader. But Formula One teams naturally gravitate toward momentum, toward confidence, toward the driver delivering solutions instead of questions. Canada may have been the first weekend where the emotional center of Ferrari visibly shifted toward Hamilton. Not politically, naturally. And if that trend continues through Monaco and the next races, Ferrari could quietly enter a completely new era much sooner than expected. But the final twist in this story is the most important one. Because Canada may not have revealed Ferrari's biggest weakness. It may have revealed Ferrari's biggest opportunity. If the power deficit truly gets confirmed officially, Ferrari could receive exactly the development freedom they need to transform the SF26 during the second half of the season. And if that happens while Hamilton keeps adapting at this pace, the rest of Formula One may have underestimated what Canada really started.